Welcome to the Alphalist Podcast. I am your host, Toby, and today I'm here with, pronounced in German, Richard Socher. And Richard Socher is the founder and CEO of You.com, the AI search engine that puts you in control. That's why he has this great domain. And they raised 25 million, I think, in Series A funding last year. And Richard actually previously served as chief scientist at Salesforce and sold his old company MetaMind to Salesforce. And I think you personally reported to Mark. Is that correct?
I worked with him directly. There's one person between us officially who runs all of technology at Salesforce, Srini. But yeah.
Okay, reporting lines are not the most important thing to touch. So, but was that all correct? And I think you were a PhD, a computer science PhD from Stanford. That's so right. You are indeed a nerd. Is that
right,
correct?
Yeah. I used to teach at Stanford too for 4 years, eventually as an adjunct professor. And just one addition, we raised 25 in our A and 20 in our seed round earlier. Yeah.
Okay, great. And you're right now sitting in your childhood room at home in Dresden. So right. You're also German. And when did you move over? Like, why? Like, maybe we start there.
Yeah. Originally, I just wanted to work with the absolute best AI people. When I was a PhD, during my undergrad already, starting 2003, I studied linguistic computer science in Leipzig. I love languages and math and programming. And so got into that. And then I switched in my master's to computer vision, but discovered what at the time was called statistical machine learning and pattern recognition, and fell in love with it and felt like, wow, man, if you can really get good at statistical machine learning, it seems like such an amazing tool that could do so many different things. I wanted to nerd out a lot about statistics and probability and linear algebra, and then during my PhD in the early days, I essentially wanted to work with the top people. So I went to the US and eventually got into Stanford after a few rejection rounds earlier, and just discovered at Stanford neural nets. Rediscovered them. You know, they're kind of one of those methods that no one really loved for a long time, anyway, without going into too many details, I found that a lot of AI at the time was kind of graduate student descent of defining and designing features for your AI problem. And then I thought, wouldn't it be cooler if you could really learn everything from scratch, from raw data? And that's kind of what we ended up doing with neural nets for natural language processing.
Did you meet Sebastian there as well? He's also Stanford, right?
I did, Sebastian Thrun. That's right. Yeah, we actually communicate quite a lot these days.
Okay, cool.
And he's a good friend of ours. We hang out together at our ranch in the Bay Area often now, and yeah, we actually did overlap during the heyday of the Stanford AI lab, when they're still Andrew Ng full-time there, and Daphne Kohler and Sebastian and Chris Manning. You know, some of those folks are still there, and some of them have mostly left or don't spend as much time at the university anymore.
Okay, cool. Is there like a detail in your personal life when you actually got attracted to computers, and why? Like, I mean, you started off with the machine learning bit and statistics, but I mean, why?
Yeah. I guess in the very early days, the first one was probably just computer games, like for many kids, right? We had a very early days of Commodore 64, and that was sort of my first computer. And then I really only got into programming in the early days through web programming, because I all of a sudden felt like, oh wow, wait, if I can program something here, everyone can see it. My friends can immediately try it out. And so I got into some more sort of nifty JavaScript programming, or like things that can move around in the browser, and you can
blink tags,
PHP, and getting like databases going, and it just seemed very powerful. I worked for my mom's company, and it's a real estate company, so I helped her kind of set up a database so she can have different listings of apartments and houses and stuff that she was selling in her real estate company. And implemented that website. And yeah, I got more into programming actually only once I could more easily share it as a kid during high school. And then, and then during, obviously once I started studying, I got more and more into it. But I wasn't, to be honest, I felt like in comparison to some people, I was a late bloomer. Like there's some people who I started coding when I was 10 years old or something. And I really only got into it at 16.
Okay.
15, 16 or so.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And what did you do with MetaMind then?
So MetaMind basically started at the end of my PhD. I finally got an EB-1A visa in the US. It's kind of called Person of Extraordinary Ability. And before that, I was on an F1 student visa, so I couldn't work. Once I got that visa, I basically had a bunch of folks asking me, hey, can you join us full time? I'm like, I kind of want to be a professor. Then they said, well, can you consult for us or just do a project? And so I did some projects, and actually one of those projects was, it's kind of funny. The very first project ever at the end of my PhD that I got paid for was this guy who wanted me to build him a very fancy autocomplete that could autocomplete a lot more code, for instance. And so I basically took a recurrent neural net and I trained it a little bit, and I said, here, this is probably your solution. And you're going to want to just get a ton more training data into this and make it a lot bigger. But this is kind of what you're going to want to use. And it's interesting because that is basically GitHub Copilot now is large neural nets and autocomplete code. But here's this little, code snippet with some first version that does something. It turns out, I guess there was another couple of years and a couple billion more parameters than the model that I had that I sent over that really got it to work. But yeah, so it felt like, there are only at the time a handful of companies that could attract some of these top people that build neural nets at the time still from scratch. C++, Python was barely coming up, and I felt like this is technology that could be useful for a lot more use cases. And it felt like I didn't just want to go, I still want to go into academia, but then even I said, well, I'll postpone my faculty job for a year and work essentially on this company, MetaMind, that would give neural network technology to a lot of other organizations and make it very, very easy to train. So we basically allowed you to just drag and drop some images into the web browser or text documents into the web browser, and then immediately back out comes a neural network with 3 lines of Python code or some curl command, and you can just run and have a functioning system. And it worked out pretty well. And eventually we actually got acquired after less than 2 years by Salesforce, where I found that, man, it would have taken us a long time to scale that technology in terms of sales, not in terms of technology. But in terms of really getting it into the hands of a lot of people, it took a lot longer. And then during that time, I also decided maybe, I started teaching on the side at Stanford. We did a little bit of research in a startup, and I realized, teaching is fun, but maybe 3 months of teaching a year is enough. Yeah. Because it does get a little repetitive. And so I ended up not becoming a full-time faculty. And then at Salesforce, we scaled the research team massively there. That was super fun. And we had a ton of impact on real products. So
Right. Salesforce has quite a sales engine, I guess.
That's right. No pun intended. Yeah, there is a force behind that. Sales.
I can imagine. How much, if you look back, I guess when you started off, infrastructure was still a key problem, right? For machine learning. I mean, these days it's kind of easy, but back then, the term MLOps wasn't really invented, I guess, and it was hard to bring it live, I guess.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, in the early days of MetaMind, there's literally no PyTorch or TensorFlow yet.
Yeah,
and so it took a long time to you had to, in some cases, do some of the math yourself to figure out your gradients and backpropagation and so on. So that's where it started. And we built our own frameworks, try to make them fast and be deep down in CUDA kernels and C++ with the team. And it was not very easy. And of course, this has gotten so easy. In fact, we call it the software 2.0 stack now, a little bit after Andre Karpathy's blog post. And this new software 2.0 stack thinks of software very differently, right? There's data set collection, then data cleaning, data labeling, then choosing the right AI model, implementing it possibly from papers or taking an open source one from Hugging Face, and potentially fine-tuning it, things like weights and biases. And full disclosure, I'm investor in both of those companies. And then, running it, watching out for distributional shift and changes over time, which a company like Colina would do, and just like keeping your data sets clean and easily extractable. So having nowadays MLOps is like another level of MLOps. And there are great companies like vector databases like Chroma, or data set sort of companies like Active Loops and ML tools. And so lots of interesting, like ZenML is another one of these ML ops companies that is open source. And again, full disclosure, I'm an investor in all of those companies. And so now through AIX, our venture fund. But long story short, there's so many tools, and in some ways, MetaMind was almost a little too early, which as an academic is great, because then you're like, oh wow, it's so visionary, you know what's happening. But as a startup founder, it's not that helpful to be too early. You want to be at the right time.
Right.
Technology. If you're too early, you can also die. Startups need to be just at the right time with the right technology, unlike academia. And so, long story short, you're 100% right. There's so many tools now, and each of these different aspects of the new software 2.0 stack has often a unicorn associated with it at this point.
Yeah, and right now for me, it's always a question like, is now the time to get into that stuff, or do you even like stand on the sideline for a bit longer and just wait until it improves, it 10x's again, right? That's like so weird. But if before we nerd off more there, maybe you can tell us a bit more about what makes you.com special, and why did you choose that direction? You want to compete with Google, or
yeah,
you want to still?
Do we want to? Yeah. Do we want to, or do we have to? So at a very high level, it started by seeing and being part of making natural language processing so much better. And you see, wow, we can now have a single model. In 2018, my co-authors, Brian McCann, Saming and Nitish, we invented prompt engineering, where you could, as input to the model, ask any kind of question, like what is the sentiment, what is the summary, what is the translation, and a single model would respond to you. And so that made it very clear to us that you could do a lot better than here's a list of blue links. Yet, you see that, and then no one's doing it. And so that's clearly an opportunity. So to answer your question, u.com is a chat first search engine that actually leverages all the latest AI. And as a user, if you're interested in, I want to be able to generate images, or I want to have AI write my essays, or I want AI write my code, you see those features in a search engine context first on u.com. And then maybe 3-6 months later, you see Google and Bing and others copy those capabilities. And by those times, we're usually already ahead again. But it is a little bit frustrating, because now, the big guys are copying more and more of those features. And their marketing, of course, says we're the first. And we're like, actually, we've already launched a chat model for a search engine with citations last year in December. And you're really just copying what we've done.
And what were your thoughts when ChatGPT was released? Like, was it, ooh, this is good, or were you already there, or like what were you thinking?
Yeah, of course we saw that earlier than most, and like UChat, actually, our sort of search chatbot with citations and stuff came out, I think, just 2 or 3 weeks after ChatGPT. And I think overall it's been a positive. It would have been even better if we had launched the first one and the only one, maybe. But I can tell you that before ChatGPT, whenever we innovated too much in search, we had the majority of users come to us and say, it's a little too different to Google, and I'm so used to Google. You can't be too different. We're the first to bring a Reddit app into search engines like early last year. So over a year ago now. And that worked. But when we innovated too far away from a list of blue links with some add-ons, users weren't ready for it. But that, thanks to ChatGPT, has massively changed. People are now much more open to new ways to find information online, new ways to get things done. And if you think about a Venn diagram of chat and search, there's a large overlap, but it's also even bigger. Chat is even bigger and can be even bigger than search, because obviously, the truth is you wouldn't ask Google, write me an HTML website with a commenting function in JavaScript, or write me this front-end code, or like train in like a neural net to do named entity recognition, or any of those things. You wouldn't ask that to a search engine, because all you'd get back is a bunch of blue links, and then you'd have to find the code. But on u.com, the answer is literally hundreds of lines of code that will just be the answer, and you just copy and paste it with the copy and paste button right there, and you're done. And so the Venn diagram, search is maybe not entirely a subset, but certainly there's a large overlap, but chat is even bigger.
Okay. Before we talk more about those facts, like what is, like, just briefly, as a technical podcast, what is briefly your infrastructure? What do you need to operate a modern search engine, which is more powerful than Google? What do you need for that?
Oh boy. So I could nerd out a little bit on that, but I also, part of me doesn't want to share too much of our stack because we have a lot of competition, big and small, that are literally trying to copy what we're doing every week. And there's some small
whatever you can disclose. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess, there's some obvious things like Databricks. There are big vector databases like Pinecone and Chroma. In the back end, there are some very large LLMs sitting on GPUs. There are both like internally as well as APIs for those. Those are some of the parts of the stack that are pretty crucial, that come up a bunch.
And I guess you run on Google Cloud and use Kubernetes then.
We don't usually share which cloud we're on, but we're not on Google Cloud.
I was just joking. Okay.
I mean, it's interesting. Sometimes you think, oh, they're the enemy, but then Google can also be potentially a partner in some ways. And they're in technology. You would think that companies like Samsung and Apple, who are producing phones that are basically competitive, would hate each other and never talk. But turns out Samsung also provides a lot of the hardware pieces that go into an iPhone with their semiconductor, area, and then they compete later on the actual phones that are being fully put together. And so, we try to be pragmatic, but yeah.
And what is the business model of a search engine of the future? Like, is it subscription based, or will it be subscription based? Or, I mean, ads is kind of like feels a bit dead, right? If you look at Google, and there are not many. There won't be so many impressions anymore and so many clicks. So
it's a really good question. Yeah, we're actually currently very focused on that. To be honest, until we had launched UChat, we sort of had 30% month-over-month growth. It was all right. But once we launched UChat, we all of a sudden had in January like 300% month-over-month growth, and then went from a couple of 100,000 users to several millions of users. And that's when we started to really have to care about our cost to serve. So we focused on that and got that under control in March. And now we're again been very nicely organically growing. And now we're focused solely on monetization. So indeed, on the one hand, people pay for chat models, but people don't pay for search. And we're a chat-based, search engine. So that puts us in an interesting new category that really doesn't exist like that. I think all the existing search engines will add this sort of as an add-on, but they're not chat first the way we are. And so long story short, we will explore some private advertisement, similar to DuckDuckGo, that is not user dependent, but it's only query or I guess nowadays conversation dependent. And then we will also explore subscription models for various expert or add-on features that, even bigger models, even more complex things that, cost even more money to serve. And then we have also now had a lot of interest in APIs. So I feel like that's a little bit distracting for a consumer search engine, but with all this interest, and we have a lot of developers on our platform, and those developers are saying, "Oh, I love the search engine, but I want to use those same models for my own stuff." So we're thinking about offering APIs as well to people.
Great. And don't you sometimes think, okay, this could be open. Maybe it shouldn't be belonging to like a for-profit entity, like Wikipedia or something. Or what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I actually thought about this a lot, and I bring it up from time to time when I get excited. But the truth is that having an open source index is only one of the many necessary ingredients for running a search engine. Turns out you have to have all of that technology also be extremely fast and available all around the world in different data centers. And those just cost a lot of money. It's kind of like open source traditionally felt like, wow, if I have the source code, now I can just run that program on my own machine. And so having the source code was all you need. But when you think about AI, having the source code is only one thing. You need to also have the weights of the model. And then you also need to have the training data to be able to train the model. And then you also need to actually have massively large, beefy machines to be able to even run the model at all, let alone train it. And so having just the source code is not, it's like 1/4 or 1/3 of the equation. And so what that means is that, especially for a search engine, it's very hard to make it work because you just can't avoid the cost. As a pure, simple on-prem open source project, you get the code and then you run it yourself. And that just doesn't work for a search engine. Like people can't run a search engine for the entire web on their laptop. It's just the laptops aren't big enough. And so that's one problem. And then of course, it's all not very cheap to run. So I'm still kind of open. I like the idea, but I have not yet seen how it would work financially and just project wise. And when you double click into it, even things like Firefox, for instance, in theory, it's an open source project, right?
Yeah, sure.
It's a nonprofit.
Yeah.
In practice, it gets 95% plus of the entire Mozilla Foundation's money comes from Google.
From Google, yeah.
And so if you come in and chat with them and hey, can we add our search engine to the list of defaults? Not even make it the default, because we know you get $300 million or something from Google for that to be the default. But just add us to the list. They're like, well, how much money are we going to get for your advertisements when we add you to the list? Not even the default option, just one of the choices. And if you don't make revenue, because we're currently, we haven't had ads, we're just now starting to explore them. It's just that the conversation goes nowhere. And even if you have the revenue there, it's just a very sort of touchy subject for them. Because if something goes wrong on that front, the entire organization loses its budget from Google. And so long story short, if you were like some open source project, right, and you wouldn't give them any money, no one will actually get to choose it, even in another open source, quote unquote, project that is a nonprofit. So
yeah,
I don't know. There's a lot of intricacies we're continuing to learn running a search engine on the financial side, the partnership side, and so on, where you realize, oh man, it's not always the best technology that will win. It will also, you have to have good partnerships. You have to have strong sales, and then like strong financial model that makes it all work.
Yeah, I mean, even looking at Wikipedia, like you brought the Firefox example, the Wikipedia is also backed and potentially also influenced through backing, right? I mean, that's always a question, like how open can information really be? What do you think? Like, who will? You just mentioned training data has to be paid as well and generated as well. Like, who will generate tomorrow's training data?
I mean, I think it'll be mostly, the world and people. It's kind of interesting, right? Like, there's this age-old saying: when the product is free, you are the product. And so the internet has been mostly free. So now the AI kind of takes all the data from the internet that is publicly available and tries to learn from it. And so I think that will continue to happen. But then I think where companies will be able to differentiate and build a little bit of a moat is to collect interesting, new, unique data sets. And so companies will continue to collect data. And then, of course, there's more complexity. You can look into biomedical data, and there it's even more unique to have your own data set.
Interesting. And how do you think online marketing can function in that world? Like in the age of search via AI, so conversational search, how will I be able to positively or negatively influence my ranking or your answers? Like, how will that look like?
Yeah, that's a whole new world. We already have a couple of SEO folks who are like reaching out and say, hey, how can I, we're seeing traffic from you.com, like how can I influence that? The truth is right now you can't. It's even harder than it is with SEO. And maybe that's okay. maybe that is part of the point. I think there's also non-zero chance that in the future you may have advertising inside the answers. So the answers will be influenced in some way or another through ads. And then you have to pay to have an even more unbiased kind of answer than you would expect otherwise. And again, if it's free, then these LLMs have to earn something somehow. And maybe it's just at the end, it's like, you might be interested in this thing. And then there's a link to an ad. That's what we're exploring right now. But who knows? Yeah. So to be honest, we haven't thought about it too much. I think we're currently thinking a lot about how to monetize this, just to stay alive as a company.
I think like really thinking this through can drive you really crazy, right? Like thinking about truth and how truth might look like tomorrow.
Right.
Like, are you afraid of that as well a bit, or?
I generally, I think as a startup founder, the default MO shouldn't be that you're afraid, but more that you're optimistic. Otherwise, it's very hard to stay alive and motivated. And you have to really remind yourself that every crisis is an opportunity. Every crisis is an opportunity, which is easier said than felt in the middle of a crisis. But yeah, long story short, in the beginning of when we launched UChat, a lot of people first search for themselves, their own names. And a lot of those early on were probably the single worst thing that the models were trying to do, because our model looked up the internet, like facts from the internet. And so if you're Michael Schultz or something, then you were a chancellor and a Formula One driver and, a Harvard professor. And so it's just like it put together a CV from all the different Michaels and all the different Schultzes that it found on the web, and put it together. And now, people are like, oh, this technology doesn't work, it's bad, blah, blah. And now if you look up your name more and more often, it correctly says, oh, like there are too many names with this, I can't tell you, or you probably mean this person. And then it's just like tries to stick to one of the people that is most likely the one you mean. So there are a lot of issues. in the limit, of course, truth and bias and so on are extremely hard. Like if someone says 2 people were killed in a drone strike in Yemen, how do you, like, no AI will tell you if that's true or not. It's just like, you need to actually be on the ground, interview people and talk. And so you need to trust journalists to be out there who really try to just get at the truth of a situation. But then of course you eventually get to some approximations of that. And there's certain journalistic outlets, and if you trust them on average, and they will have corrections if they're wrong, and you build some kind of trust with them. And sometimes even those are struggling. There's some examples of like the lab leak theory, where for a while you were like a conspiracy nutter, and then maybe it was true after all. And now people, like even smart people, don't have full consensus on the situation. And in those cases, I think it'll be important. And I think actually chat models will be better in the future for at describing these kinds of situations, and to expose users to different viewpoints. And I think in the limit, that can even help democracy and finding the truth.
I guess it's also about the way how you express the certainty of the model, right?
Right.
Am I sure or not? Like if you ask ChatGPT for something, like it's always very to the point, and there's no way to understand like if the model was really thinking it was correct or not, right?
Right.
Is this like 99% or is it just like 20? You don't know, right?
Right. Yeah, we're working on those exact kinds of issues, and looking forward in the next few months to output more and more of those like features to help you understand the veracity and certainty of it. But it's non-trivial, and it's even
especially
worse
for text, right? I mean, for text, like understanding, like is this a real text or not? Like right. It's not possible, right? Like, or not really.
Again, in the limit, it's not possible, but you can do approximations. But
yeah.
The biggest thing is, if you say you're certain, then you also better be right. Yeah. And so it's even worse if you make a mistake and you're saying, I'm certain this is true, and then it's not true. That's even worse than just saying it and it's being slightly wrong. But it is something that, of course, we continue to work on, and we continue to make it better. I think in general, generative AI, sort of a model I developed, is very good when it will take you a long time to create an answer, an artifact, a piece of code, an image, and so on. But it's very quick to verify its usefulness or correctness. And so when you ask an AI model to write you some front-end code, for instance, you just copy and paste it, rerun it, and you're like, this looks the way I want it to look, and you're done. And so it could have taken you an hour to write it, but it only takes you 5 seconds to run it and then see if it works or not. And so what that means, same with images, right? It could take you hours to draw an image, but you look at it and you're like, this looks like crap, or this looks beautiful, and this is what I want, and so you're done. And for facts, I think they fall in between. Sometimes we give you a nice citation to that fact, and if that is a particularly important fact, you can just quickly verify it in the citation link or on the web links that we still show you on your.com on the right. And then it is there. Sometimes the facts that it describes are a little bit harder, and then the use cases are less obvious. And then oftentimes what that means is you probably want to rely on the links, which we still show you on the right, just like your old school search engine.
Okay. So you can still verify the sources essentially, and that right. Becomes maybe like part of your journey then, or your job. Speaking of jobs, yeah, obviously, like there's lots of discussion, especially after ChatGPT, which made it very accessible, like made AI finally accessible. Like everyone was talking before, but now it's accessible. How do you think this will change the job world? Like, will it even lead to our brains being like partly not unused, but having like just different content? Like, I remember my dad with that huge atlas when we drove on vacation. Like, I don't know if you had the same experience. Like, we always had that huge atlas. And nowadays, when I visit my dad, he asked me, like, how did you get here? And I mostly don't know, most of the times. Like, how will this change our thinking and the usage of our brain from your perspective? And yeah, second question, job world. Maybe we do that later.
Yeah, so I think people over-index on the importance of skills that they had and needed when they grew up. Yeah. And the truth is, like, I mean, I find it also funny. Some people are sort of navigationally challenged, is how I like to say it sometimes. And, they couldn't for the life of them navigate without Google Maps or something. And part of me is like, oh man, you would be lost. But the truth is, like, most people who can navigate with a map would also be lost without a map in a forest, because they don't know how to use the sun and so on. They just kind of use a map and they use street signs and whatnot. But how important is it to, be able to find your way out of a forest these days? Like, it's not been that important for most people for many decades. And so, skills that are helpful over time change. And through industrial revolution and through automation, things change. Most people would not understand how to replicate a toaster. It's actually a fun thing I like to do on long drives sometimes, which is like play a game where you get dropped 2,000 years in the past. And now you have all the knowledge you have. You just time traveled by accident 2,000 years into the past. Now what do? How do you try to help humanity speed up its technological progress? The truth is, most people have no clue how to make electricity, how to transfer electricity, how to do a lot of basic things. And so, long story short, as a long-winded answer to skills will change. Certain skills will be less important. New skills will be more important. And I do think kids will have, like, education will have to change. You have to really update the curricula for kids. You have to teach them how to program. I've been telling that to a lot of politicians. Programming will have
programming. Is that still important?
It is 100% still important, in the same way as, you might say translation isn't important, or learning a language isn't important because you can just use a translating algorithm, like a translation algorithm now. But the truth is, you still need to have a live conversation, and you can't just be like, oh, he's saying that, it's translating it, and then you talk back to it. Of course, that will get faster and faster, and it will incorporate speech and everything. But you still need to be able to think. And so when you think about concretely generative AI, it goes back to this model that I just came up with a few weeks ago, which is you might not have to generate as much content, but you still need to have the judgment to know if the content is any good. You still need to be able to verify that the facts in it are true. And you need to still know things in order to be able to creatively recombine them. And so, will it be as important to be able to draw nicely when AI will draw for you? No. Will it be as important to crank out simple sort of regurgitating, summarizing text? Probably not. But will it be important to understand how to structure a good argument to convince someone in a conversation? Certainly. Will it be important to be able to read a text that maybe an AI had written and evaluate whether it's going to convince anyone else of some facts? I think those are all still going to be important, and those are new skills that people will have. And I guess I don't worry too much about people getting, like, more and more stupid, and like sort of the Idiocracy movie that a lot of people found very sort of present, or like just innovative and sort of predictive. There is a little bit of that concern in the longer term time horizon, but I don't think that will happen in the next generation or two.
So we all don't have to be afraid of that. Like, if I know Ruby as an example, it will be there for a while, most likely, right?
Like, AI will write some code for you, but you still need to be able to fix it and integrate it. And if it's wrong, you need to find it. And if there's a bug, you need to be able to fix it. And so, I think there's a ton of ways that you want to verify. There's some funny signs where it is a Chinese hairdresser, and the New English name for the hairdresser is could not connect to a translation service. And, if you don't know anything, a single word in the English language, you will print that big sign and put it on your hairdresser,
that's a nice example. Yeah. Yeah.
So
I also see it that way.
Yeah.
I also see it that way. But I mean, most likely programming, or it could happen that programming rather ends up writing specs, right? Like writing stories, writing acceptance criteria, and then you get something generated. I guess that will be popping up soon, like as a new form of no code, maybe.
That's right.
Yeah,
I think that will also happen. Like in many ways, the abstraction layers are going to get bigger, like higher and higher, right? And you'll just be even to be more productive. You don't really have to write in assembler anymore, right? No one has to. And so you just don't have to be that low level machine code instructions. And that's a good thing, right? Like that allows us to be more productive and build higher, more interesting, complex systems. Now, there will always be some people who have to be close to the metal, right? And build new CUDA kernels or new kind of speed algorithms for new kinds of hardware that keeps getting developed, but it's fewer and fewer people. It's a less and less important skill for building things. And, you have things like JavaScript and Node.js and Swift and others, so that, those will allow you to build apps more quickly and front-end web development things. And I think that will continue. And you're right. I think English will enable you to build and is already able to help you build a couple of simple, quick things. But if you then want to edit them, you want to say, oh, I want this also, and I want it to be slightly different. You can keep trying to explain it to an algorithm, but at some point you will have diminishing returns, and you'll actually be faster if you just knew how to do it, rather than keep sort of iterating, say, to the algorithm. Oh, but like make the box just like 2 pixels to the left. Oh wait, but not if the screen is this big. Then just make the button disappear. Oh wait, but
change the margin. Yeah,
yeah, exactly. It's just like, and at some point you realize, wait, it's probably just better if you had explicitly been able to program that, and then at that point you'd be faster. And so, but you get again a quick version of it, a default, and then if you know what you're doing and you know how to code, you'll be able to modify it and get it to a really good end result even more quickly.
And right now, if I open up Twitter in the morning, I kind of see this huge AI dust storm that I guess many of us are facing these days, and I think like many CTOs out there are supposed to have an opinion on that. Like, is it something we can leverage? Are we doomed? Is it an opportunity? What would you recommend to navigate through that dust storm?
So I do think Twitter is actually a useful place for staying up to date in AI. I think there is a little bit of hype, but the way I think about it is, indeed, you are like there's sort of different waves of AI. Some people it feels like for them it's been for some people it feels like, oh, this has come out of nowhere. Right? You haven't had like AI just didn't work, and now all of a sudden it's super big. But the truth is, there have been tons of improvements over the last decade where all of a sudden speech recognition worked, and then computer vision and object recognition started to work, and then translation started to work. Like no translator who gets paid per word and not per hour is not using AI. Mm-hmm. They're all using AI to get a raw translation, and they're fixing things up. And now with generative AI and general sort of chat models and generative image models, it's become even more close to people, even closer and visceral and sort of obvious to people how much this can change things. And so yeah, I think it's going to be a really, really exciting time. People should stay up to date. But as each wave comes, the swell is rising. Like the capabilities are getting better behind that big wave. Mm-hmm. But maybe at the very top of inflated expectations, there will be a bit of a letdown because, AI cannot yet fully program itself. Like auto GPT types of things are a little bit overhyped. But that technology, I think, in the next 6 to 24 months will do some pretty incredible things and will be able to improve itself more and more. And I'm very excited about the future. I think humanity is kind of in the middle of an exponential increase in capabilities. And I don't think that exponential will last forever. Most exponentials in technology usually flatten out and become an S-curve at some point, but we don't know how long that exponential growth is going to continue. And I'm very excited for it. I think long term, no one's going to look back and be like, oh yeah, I wish I could, do radiology like analysis like every day nonstop. I think it'll be cooler if I just explain to an AI what I'm doing, have it read the textbook, and then do it for me. And this is not going to happen overnight. We still continue to need radiologists, and we probably will always need them. I think the way I think about it, if there are 100 jobs and 100 people doing something, those 100 people will not get replaced entirely by an AI, but they will often, different industries have different time frames and so on, but they'll probably get replaced by 10 people that use AI rather than, all like 100, like 0 people and only AI. And so I think that will be exciting. And just like, 150 years ago, over 90% of people worked in agriculture.
Yeah, for sure.
No one looks back and says, oh, it'd be cool if we just worked with our hands all day in the heat, in the cold, in the fields. Like no one says that now. But at the time when the big tractors coming, those big tractors are 1,000 times stronger than you are. Yeah. Right. And if you just stood in their way, they would crush you. You're like, oh man, that's really scary. Like overlord, tractor, train, whatever, right? Maybe you should, and people were scared. Like big trains are scary first time you see it. And so, but long term, everyone likes the technology. Everyone loves convenience and simplifying lives. And now people are doing, I think, more interesting things than working in the field. And I think we will do even more interesting things 100 years from now.
Obviously. So I guess a good strategy is to get comfortable with it, right? Like especially as a CTO then these days.
That's right.
What do you think about, like, there are so many businesses popping up, many startups, like there are many bootstrappers who just these days use like OpenAI APIs and build simple stuff or more complex stuff. And it seems that it's harder to have a moat as a business. So how do you think about that? Like, is everything just commoditized then, like in a few months, or how do you think about that?
Yeah, so I think at some point probably LLMs are themselves more of a commodity, and my strong hunch is that LLMs are going to be kind of like databases. You sometimes may need an Oracle to have 1 million queries a second, and it needs to be super fast, and it needs to be very reliable, and it's just massive requirements. And then you just need a very large, very powerful database. But a lot of people will just download some MySQL database, which is the Alpaca, Llamas, open source models of the world, and then you just hack up your own website and build it. And so I think the LLM might not be the differentiating factor, but just like which database you use isn't a differentiating factor. You still need to use one, and you can still do a lot of cool stuff with it. And I think that will continue to be right. And there will be new kinds of modes of users and communities, and training those LLMs on interesting tasks, getting more and more data about how to do things. New kinds of modes will arise in the future.
Okay. So I still have 3 questions for you. So we shortly come to the end. From your perspective, talking about tomorrow, what's keeping you awake at night? Like, is there something that you think will lead to the next wave of disruption? Is there anything like crazy technological that you right now see where like you tell everyone about that it's like really revolutionary?
I mean, I think you don't have to go too far. You just love LLMs, and we were in the middle of that revolution. And then there are a few things that I tell everyone internally in the company about, but I don't really want to tell everyone else outside the company what I tell those folks inside the company.
So there's a lot to expect there, like
yeah.
models will get bigger, stuff like that, or
those are the obvious things. They get more multimodal. Like we had the first LLM that will output graphs and tables and things like that inside a large language model, and that is now also being copied by the big guys. So how quickly we can continue to innovate and stay ahead of the big guys. So users at some point realize, oh wow, yeah, I do see the future from you.com 3 to 6 months before I see it with the big guys in some like closed demo and whatnot, or closed beta, will continue to be something that will keep me up for the coming future.
And when do you expect AGI?
I think we just don't know. I think people have both in terms of the fear as well as the excitement, inflated expectations. The truth is, no one's really working on it. Anyway, I could talk about it for a long time, but I would put it somewhere between 30 to 200 years.
30 to 200 years, okay. Yeah, because the release of ChatGPT kind of led to the general thinking that it's rather 5 years than 30 years or 200.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing is a lot of people think that. I actually have a bet that I think I've won. I need to look up when the date was, but about 5 years ago, I had a bet with one of the OpenAI founders, and he thought they're going to have AGI already, and we have 0 of the 3 requirements fulfilled, and all 3 need to be fulfilled for him to win.
Okay.
And so yeah, I think people are a little bit too optimistic. But it also then kind of, you double click on it, it's like, what's your definition of AGI? And the truth is, you don't need AGI to automate 80% of jobs. Like, you just have a system that predicts the next byte pair encoding. It has no sense of what a word is. It has no conceptual sort of sense of itself, of what it means to be alive, and so on. And you can have a huge amount of impact of all of humanity with just very, very strong AI that isn't fully generalized, self-conscious, super intelligent, can actually then just like read all the physics books and then like suddenly figure out what particles are actually the reality, right? And then set up and build an entire new Large Hadron Collider and run the actual right experiments and then bring physics forward. Like, good luck with that. That will take a lot longer than people think.
So as a last question, I still have a little surprise for you. Mark Benioff of Salesforce told me about a little Easter egg that you personally built into the Einstein engine, as like your leftovers at Salesforce are called. Your product is being called now, and it's a feature that you have to be able to program Apex to use it, and it's called the Time Machine. The Einstein on your phone. Thanks. It's a special package that actually allows you to really travel back in time, just back, not forth. I prepared like a little experiment, fire up my good old JetForcer IDE, and just hit run on the code I prepared before. And now we literally travel back in time to August 2014, the year you graduated from Stanford and kicked off MetaMind. And we now observe young Richard coding a little or coding a lot. And you now have the chance to whisper something into young Richard's ears. What would it be?
Probably to continue doing what you're doing, because I'm very happy of how life turned out. But probably think more about large language modeling as one of the tasks that you should train an AI with. So not just a lot of supervised multitask learning, not just a single model for all of NLP, but one that just does large language models more. And to have even more conviction that is right. Because I had from 2014 to 2018, we had the best large language models in the world. Like, we called them pointer models, which were sort of the precursor to transformer models. and we just didn't scale them to cost $30 million for training one model.
Yeah.
But we should have just kept scaling. And I've told the first author of those papers, let's just scale them up and see if something interesting happens. But I didn't push it hard enough.
You didn't push hard
and
enough.
I should have.
Okay.
I should have pushed the language modeling objective even more, because ultimately full language modeling, where you are perfectly good at predicting the next word, is NLP complete and is AI complete, right? If you say, oh, the next word from, I'm in Dresden right now and I want to get back to San Francisco, and I navigate all the streets and navigate all the airports and so on, it means you have a perfect world model, you have a perfect planning model, you have a perfect visual model, and you can do a lot of things. You can communicate with people who might not want to let you get the ticket anymore because you're 5 minutes late to the counter, like all of these things, right? And so you realize, wow, like predicting the next word is an incredibly interesting and hard task. And you can do a lot of things with it, assuming you have the right objective functions for it. So,
thanks a lot, Richard. Great recording. Many thanks. Have a safe trip home. And I hope I can visit you on your ranch at a certain point in the next years.
You'd be very welcome. Yeah.
Sounds quite exciting. So thanks a lot for your time.
Thank you. Thanks for your great questions. Yeah, it was a fun one. You asked some questions that no one has asked before, which is getting harder and harder. So that was fun.
Great. Bye-bye.
Bye.